I want to give you this hypothetical scenario. This man right here is Travis Hunter, and I think he needs no explanation as to how good he is. I don't know where he's going to go in the NFL draft if you're watching as of this video getting released, but I do know this much: he is going to be chosen very early on, and if he falls out of the top 5, it will be downright shocking. Now let's assume that the Cleveland Browns, with the second pick in the draft, decide to take the man. You're seeing highlights of him at wide receiver, but I want you to imagine after the draft that the Browns announce that he's going to be playing linebacker. They're switching his position. Now, for a player to not play the position he excelled at in college and be chosen in the NFL draft isn't anything unusual. There are plenty of examples of guys switching positions once they make it into the NFL, like Matt Jones with the Jacksonville Jaguars, Leroy Keys with the Philadelphia Eagles, Julian Edelman with the New England Patriots, Logan Thomas with a handful of teams from quarterback to tight end, and so on and so forth. But I want you to imagine that Hunter, upon hearing the news, is confused. In fact, he's outright laughing because he has no idea what a linebacker is. Seriously, imagine that the player who gets drafted has no clue not on how to play the position, but what the position is. It would be like if a company hires you to be their advertising director, and you say, "Wait, what's an advertisement? What's the director? I've never heard of an advertisement in my life." That would seem kind of insane, right? Well, I bring that scenario up because, amazingly enough, more than half a century ago, this actually happened where a player got drafted to play a specific position, and the player genuinely had no idea what the position was. That's why I bring up the Travis Hunter scenario with this man right here. And I'm not talking about a scenario where the man didn't know how to play the position. I mean that the man genuinely did not know that position on the field, even though it is one of the most instrumental positions in all of football. Because in 1969, when the Baltimore Colts drafted George Thompson to play defensive back, there was just one small problem that they never took into account. And it deserves a deep dive here today, because it went about as well as you could expect. Because this is the story behind one of the dumbest moments in the history of the NFL draft that you've never heard of before. Be sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL and the NFL draft. And we have a couple of live streams every day as well, where we talk all things sports. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is the place for you. Thanks in advance for your support as we try and grow this community even more. And with that in mind, let's talk about the player who got drafted to do a job he had no idea about. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand who the man was that the Colts drafted in the first place. This man right here is Marquette player George Thompson. And if you're thinking to yourself, hey, wait a second, why is he playing basketball? And why did you say Marquette when Marquette's football team got discontinued in 1960 and we're talking about the 1969 NFL draft? We're going to get to that. However, before we do, let's make it very clear. George Thompson might be the best basketball player in Marquette history. If you are a Marquette fan, or you know your college basketball history, you know how good this guy was. In 3 seasons, Thompson led Marquette to the NCAA tournament twice and an NIT appearance, including an Elite 8 appearance for only the second time ever. Marquette was consistently one of the top teams in the nation throughout the late 60s, and Thompson, who averaged over 20 points per game across those seasons, was a huge reason why. By the time Thompson's career at Marquette was done, he ended it with 1,773 points, making him the all-time leader at the time in career points and points per game, with both marks not being broken until 40 and 50 years later, respectively. Remember, back then, there were no three-pointers. He had more field goals than anyone else in Marquette history, and he is one of just a handful of players to have his jersey number retired, as no one is more than number 24 jersey since Thompson left. Bottom line, Thompson was a heck of a basketball player, and is still remembered today all these years later for how good he was. So what does this have to do with football? Thompson was a great basketball player, but what did this have to do with the gridiron? Especially when you realize that Marquette doesn't have a football team, and hadn't for quite some time, as the school had been without one since 1960. It would be incredibly bizarre to see the Tennessee Titans draft a player out of Hofstra, or to see the Arizona Cardinals draft a player from Jacksonville University. However, back in 1969, you have to understand something about the draft, and that's the fact that it was incredibly long and incredibly tedious. By the end of the draft, everyone was bored out of their minds and everyone was tired, because you knew most of the guys you were taking were not making the team. When you ask anyone what the most successful draft class of all time was, just about everyone will say it's the 1974 Pittsburgh Steelers, and rightfully so. What no one tells you about that class was that 12 of the guys they drafted never played a single snap in professional football. In 1969, the NFL draft was 17 rounds and 442 picks. There were 26 teams across the NFL and the AFL, and the roster size for each team was 40 players. So that should give you an idea of how many picks we're going to waste. It would almost be like if today, the NFL draft was 25 rounds. It was not uncommon as the draft went on to see rounds where of the 26 picks, only 2 or 3 of them would even suit up in a single game. You were truly scraping the bottom of the barrel. So what some teams decided to do was draft traits and think outside the box, and draft players later on who did not play football. We're talking about really good athletes who may have never stepped on a football field before, but might be enticed to give it a try if they can get some money. Olympic sprinters have been chosen, like John Carlos at the 1970 NFL Draft and Carl Lewis at the 1984 NFL Draft, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Basketball players have been chosen for their height and jumping abilities. Baseball players have been chosen for their ability to track a ball in the air. High jumpers have been chosen because of their vertical. You get the idea. When you got to this stage in the draft, especially with how primitive scouting technology was back then, without computers or a ton of film, you were throwing darts to the board and seeing what stuck. If you got a really fast Olympic sprinter or a really good basketball player, and he plays well and makes that transition over to football, you struck gold, and he's got such an edge over everyone else. If the player fails or decides not to play football, it's no harm done. That pick was going to be cut anyway. And the Colts had done this successfully before. 2 years before, at the 1967 NFL Draft, the Colts decided to spend their 12th round pick, which was pick number 298, on this man right here. Some guy named Preston Pearson, an Illinois basketball player who never played a single down of college football. Despite that, the Colts figured that they had nothing to lose, and they took a flyer on the guy, hoping that his athleticism in basketball would translate well to football, if he even would want to play football. Safe to say, this decision paid off, as while none of the players picked from picks 284 to 297 played a down in professional football, Pearson at pick 298 played many. Pearson ended his career in the NFL as an absolute legend, playing 14 seasons and recording over 6,700 yards from scrimmage. By the time his career was done after the 1980 season, Pearson had over 3,000 yards rushing and over 3,000 yards receiving, making him one of just 12 players in NFL history at the time to be a part of the 3,000 club. For a man who had never played football in college and was a complete shot in the dark, because why not in the 12th round, that's not too bad. You draft a guy like Preston Pearson in the first round, that's a heck of a pick. Do it in the 12th round when everyone else isn't even seeing the field or coming close to making the team, and that's one of the best picks ever. And with that in mind, we have some context for why the Colts would do this and take this man right here in George Thompson. Because with pick number 389, the 15th round, they were like, screw it. We just made the Super Bowl. We're the best team in the NFL. No one that we pick at this stage has any chance of making the roster unless we really think outside the box and hit a home run. Not a bad strategy, seeing as the 9 guys taken before pick number 389 and 21 of the 22 guys taken before pick 389 never played a down in the NFL, unless names like Charlie Jarvis, Sam Frankowitz, Chick McGeehan, and Bob Coble ring any bells for you. And if they do, you're lying, because I literally made one of those names up to show you that the 15th round produced no one, and you don't even know which one of the 4 I made up. So the Colts decide to take Marquette guard George Thompson, as in the man you've been watching this whole time. Maybe his incredible basketball prowess would translate well to the NFL, and he could be one of the notable players to make the switch to football without ever playing college football. Except, there was just one small problem with this draft pick that was going to throw a wrench in Baltimore's plans that would make this the exact opposite of what happened with Preston Pearson. And that was the fact that George Thompson had no idea what football was. The Colts drafted him to be a defensive back, as in the player that guards opposing wide receivers and tries to intercept and break up passes. Not only had Thompson never played defensive back before, but he didn't even know what one was. As Thompson said when he got drafted, "I'll have to listen to the Colts sulfur, but I have to confess, being drafted by Baltimore is amusing. I don't even know what a defensive back does." Remember that opening press conference for Ted Lasso when he asked the reporters what the rules of the sport are that he's been assigned to coach? That's what this was like. A reporter asked him what it was like getting drafted by the Colts to play defensive back, and he was asking what a defensive back even does. The only experience Thompson had with football of any kind, playing it or watching it, was throwing a ball around on the lakefront. That was it. Tommy Wiseau has a better understanding of what football was than the man that the defending NFL champion literally drafted to play for them. And I don't think it's going to come as a surprise that this decision did not work out for the Colts in the end. Which, true, it's no harm done, but it's still hysterical all the same. The Colts tried to convince themselves that Thompson would want to give the sport a try. Apparently, because Thompson was only 6'2", his chances of playing in the NBA were slim. So Gene Shue, the head coach for the Baltimore Bullets, said that the Colts should take a look at this kid and just see what happens. But when, number one, Thompson had never played this sport before or even heard of the sport, number two, Thompson said that basketball was his only love, and number three, Thompson led Marquette to the NCAA tournament, led them to within a game of the Final Four, and averaged over 24 points per game while doing so, boosting his pro basketball chances. It was clear that this was never going to work out. Thompson played a decade of professional basketball across the NBA and the ABA, being named a three-time ABA All-Star who scored over 8,000 points across the two leagues, and never played a single snap of professional football. Then again, seeing as the man had never played a single snap of football of any kind at any level, this should not come as a surprise. Also, super cold take by Gene Shue to say that he was not going to ever make it in professional basketball, only for him to make 3 All-Star appearances and score over 8,000 points. Which is weird because Shue was a good coach, but he whiffed pretty badly on that one and ended up screwing 2 Baltimore teams over with 1 stone. Again, do I blame the Colts for this one? Absolutely not. This was the time to gamble and take a shot in the dark, and you really had nothing to lose. There were literally only 9 players throughout the remainder of the NFL draft who were chosen after Thompson that even played a single snap in the NFL or the AFL. And of those 9, only 7 of them played more than 1 season. So it's not like the Colts did this move and passed up on Tom Brady. But it's still something that deserves to be remembered all these years later for how nonsensical it was, and for how crazy the NFL draft was back then. As a word to the wise, to anyone who's picking a player in the NFL draft, make sure the player that you take knows what football is. If you're drafting someone who doesn't know what position you're assigning them to, as in, they genuinely don't know what the positions on the football field are, then maybe you might want to rethink your draft pick. Because when it came to this 15th round pick in 1969 for the Baltimore Colts, the decision to take George Thompson was a massive airball. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.